Good evening. I'm Dr. Helena Ashford, and I'll be moderating tonight's debate on the nature of effective leadership. Before we begin, I must challenge both participants to move beyond platitudes. We're not here for comfortable answers. We're here for rigorous examination of how these leaders actually wielded power, made decisions, and shaped their nations. Let's begin. Queen Elizabeth, you may begin. What, in your view, constitutes effective leadership?
I thank you, Madam Moderator. Effective leadership is not the thunderous proclamation of will, but rather the delicate orchestration of competing interests toward a unified purpose. When I ascended to the throne in 1558, England was fractured, religiously divided, economically weakened, and surrounded by enemies who believed a woman incapable of rule. I chose not to make windows into men's souls regarding their private faith, but rather to establish a via media, a middle way, that allowed my subjects to worship with sufficient latitude while maintaining national unity. I cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen married to England itself, transforming a liability, my unmarried state, into a symbol of constancy and devotion. Leadership, I would argue, is the art of perception and patience. One must understand that power flows not merely from decree, but from the consent and affection of the governed. I survived by being indispensable, by making myself the irreplaceable center around which all orbited.
A carefully constructed image, then. Mr. Churchill, your opening statement.
I appreciate Her Majesty's eloquence, though I must respectfully suggest that her era afforded luxuries mine did not. When I assumed office in May of 1940, Britain faced not theological disputes or dynastic succession, but annihilation. Nazi Germany had conquered France in 6 weeks. We stood alone. Effective leadership, in my estimation, is the capacity to see clearly what must be done, and to possess the moral courage to demand it of oneself and one's nation, regardless of comfort or popularity. I told the British people we would have blood, toil, tears, and sweat, not because it was pleasant, but because it was true. Leadership is not the cultivation of image for its own sake, but the projection of indomitable will in service of a just cause. When I declared we would never surrender, I was not engaging in rhetoric for effect. I was articulating the only path that preserved our civilization. Sometimes, Madam Moderator, a leader must be willing to be unpopular in the moment to be vindicated by history.
Let me challenge both of you immediately. Queen Elizabeth, Mr. Churchill suggests your approach was luxury born of a less existential threat. How do you respond to the charge that your methods would have failed in genuine crisis?
A fair question, and one that reveals a misunderstanding of the nature of my challenges. Mr. Churchill faced a military threat of defined duration, terrible though it was. I faced threats that were perpetual and multifaceted. The Spanish Armada of 1588 was not merely a military engagement, it was an existential threat backed by the most powerful Catholic monarchy in Christendom, supported by the Pope himself, who had excommunicated me and declared my throne illegitimate. Yet I did not merely survive, I transformed that moment into the foundation of English naval supremacy for centuries. But more profoundly, I faced the constant threat of assassination, religious civil war, and the fundamental question of whether a female monarch could be taken seriously by any male-dominated power structure in Europe. My image, as Mr. Churchill dismissively terms it, was not vanity, it was statecraft. By making myself a symbol rather than merely a woman, I transcended the biological limitations my enemies sought to exploit. Furthermore, I maintained stability for 45 years. Mr. Churchill's tenure, however glorious, lasted but 6 years in his first administration. Longevity itself is a measure of effective leadership.
Her Majesty makes a compelling point about longevity, but I must challenge the underlying assumption. Is a leader's effectiveness measured by duration in office or by what is accomplished during that tenure? I would argue that 6 years of decisive action that saved Western civilization from totalitarian darkness outweighs decades of careful management. Moreover, I was not continuously in power. I was removed in 1945 precisely because the British people, having won the war, sought different leadership for peace. That is not a failure. That is democracy functioning as it should. But here is my deeper challenge to Her Majesty. Her approach, however sophisticated, was fundamentally conservative. She maintained the status quo, preserved her throne, and left England much as she found it. Prosperous, yes, but not transformed. I was asked to transform Britain's very relationship to its future. These are different orders of challenge.
So you're suggesting, Mr. Churchill, that transformative leadership is inherently superior to preservationist leadership?
Not inherently superior in all contexts, but superior when circumstances demand it. In times of existential threat, the leader who merely preserves is ultimately a failure, because preservation without victory is merely postponement of defeat.
Queen Elizabeth, I'll press you on this point. Mr. Churchill argues that his transformative leadership was necessary for survival. Yet you also faced existential threats, religious extremism, foreign invasion, assassination plots. Why did you choose the path of careful balance rather than decisive transformation?
Because, Madam Moderator, I understood something Mr. Churchill's era perhaps took for granted, that legitimacy is the foundation of all power. I inherited a throne that many, including the Pope, considered illegitimate. A woman ruling in her own right was not merely unusual, it was considered contrary to natural law and divine will. Had I responded to threats with the kind of decisive, transformative action Mr. Churchill describes, I would have confirmed my enemy's accusations that I was an unnatural usurper. Instead, I demonstrated through 45 years of stable, prosperous rule that a woman could govern as effectively as any man. That was my transformation. Not of England's structure, but of the very concept of female authority. The Spanish Armada was defeated, not through my personal military genius, I left such matters to Drake and my admirals, but through the loyalty of a unified nation that believed in my right to rule. That unity was the product of decades of careful religious settlement and political balance. Mr. Churchill had the advantage of fighting an external enemy that united his nation. I had to create that unity from religious division and gender prejudice, which required more transformative leadership.
Her Majesty raises a genuinely important point about legitimacy, and I concede that her situation required different tools than mine. Yet I must ask, did she not have the opportunity for greater transformation? Consider, she inherited a nation emerging from religious civil war. She might have used her authority to establish religious tolerance as an active principle, not merely a pragmatic compromise. She might have invested more substantially in exploration and colonization, ventures that would have transformed England's global position far more dramatically than she did. She might have challenged the subordination of women more directly, using her own example as a lever for broader change. Instead, she chose the path of minimum necessary action. That is prudent governance, perhaps, but it is not transformative leadership. And I would argue that transformative leadership, the willingness to reshape institutions and possibilities, is what separates the merely competent from the truly great.
A stinging critique. Queen Elizabeth, your response?
Mr. Churchill mistakes restraint for lack of ambition. I transformed England's position in the world more profoundly than he suggests. When I ascended, England was a minor, impoverished nation on the periphery of European power. When I died, England was a major naval power with the beginnings of a global empire, a centre of Renaissance learning and culture, and a nation whose religious settlement would endure for centuries. This was not accomplished through dramatic gestures, but through the patient accumulation of power and the careful cultivation of national identity. I did challenge the subordination of women, not through revolutionary proclamation, but through the simple fact of my effective rule. Every day I governed was a refutation of the claim that women were unfit to rule. As for exploration and colonization, I supported Raleigh's ventures in the New World, but I did so cautiously because I understood that overextension destroys nations. Mr. Churchill speaks of transformation as though it were always virtuous, but transformation without wisdom is merely destruction.
Let me challenge both of you on the question of moral clarity, Mr. Churchill. You've emphasized the importance of clear moral purpose. Yet Queen Elizabeth navigated a world of profound moral ambiguity, religious conflict, the question of her own legitimacy, the treatment of Catholics and Protestants. Did she lack moral clarity, or did she possess a different kind of moral wisdom?
That is a penetrating question, and I must revise my earlier position somewhat. Her Majesty did possess moral clarity. It was simply of a different kind than mine. She was clear that national unity and survival were the paramount moral goods. In service of that clarity, she was willing to compromise on other moral questions. I, by contrast, faced a situation where moral clarity and national survival were aligned. Defeating Nazi Germany was both morally necessary and strategically essential. I did not have to choose between them. Her Majesty often did have to make such choices, and she chose national survival. That is a defensible moral position, though not the one I would have chosen. But here is where I must press back. Does not the leader have a responsibility to expand the moral horizons of their nation, not merely to navigate existing moral ambiguities? I used my position to articulate a vision of Western civilization worth defending. Did Her Majesty use her position to expand the moral possibilities available to her people?
Mr. Churchill asks whether I expanded moral horizons. I would argue that I did so in the most profound way possible. I demonstrated that the moral category woman could encompass ruler. That was not a small expansion of moral horizons. But I must also challenge his premise. Mr. Churchill suggests that moral clarity and strategic necessity were aligned in his case. I would argue that this is precisely where his situation was easier than mine. When your enemy is unambiguously evil, as Nazi Germany was, moral clarity becomes simpler. But when your nation is divided between Catholics and Protestants, each believing the other damned, and each capable of assassination or rebellion, moral clarity becomes a luxury. I chose to prioritize peace over doctrinal purity. Some would say I lacked moral courage. I would say I possessed a different kind of moral courage, the courage to accept that perfect justice was impossible, and that the pursuit of it would destroy the nation I was sworn to protect.
So you're suggesting that moral compromise can itself be a form of moral courage?
Precisely. The leader who refuses all compromise in service of abstract principle is often the leader who destroys their nation. I was willing to be accused of moral weakness, of not being sufficiently Protestant, of not being sufficiently Catholic, in order to preserve the possibility of coexistence. That required a kind of moral strength that is often unseen because it does not roar, it endures. For 45 years I chose the path that kept England whole, not the path that satisfied zealots, nor the path that gratified my own pride, but the path that allowed my people to live, worship and prosper without descending into the fires that consumed so many other realms. Moral clarity is admirable, Mr. Churchill, but moral clarity without restraint becomes fanaticism. And fanaticism, whether draped in the banner of faith or the banner of ideology, is the enemy of peace. If I lacked anything, Madam Moderator, it was not moral courage. It was the luxury of simplicity. My world demanded balance. My throne demanded subtlety. My people demanded survival, and I gave them all three. That, I submit, is also leadership.
Well, it looks like we have a winner here. If you guys enjoyed this debate, let me know in the comments and who you would like to see in the future. Au revoir for now.